For 30 years, the world saw Andre Rieu as the man who made millions smile, never suspecting how much he hid behind that carefully polished grace. Audiences believed they knew him, the king of the waltz, with the warm laugh, the glittering concerts, the effortless charm. But the truth was far heavier than the bow he carried. Behind every standing ovation stood a man fighting a private battle that no spotlight ever revealed. And when the truth finally surfaced, it became clear that Andre Rieu had been living two lives, one for the world and one for survival. Andre Leon Marie Nicolas Rieu was born on October 1st, 1949, into a house where discipline overshadowed childhood and affection was nearly non-existent. His father, the respected conductor Andre Rieu Sr., ruled his home with the same precision he demanded from orchestras, leaving no room for laughter, imagination, or comfort. His mother enforced perfection with equal severity, dismissing creativity as weakness and treating emotion as a flaw to be corrected. What the public would later call elegance was born out of boy's need to hide the fractures inside him. Even in interviews decades later, when he quietly admitted, "My parents didn't love me," it was not bitterness. It was survival. At age 5, something shifted. A young violin mentor, only 18, placed a violin in his hands and unlocked something the rigid household had never allowed him to feel: safety. She didn't bark orders or measure him against siblings. She encouraged him to listen, to feel, to breathe. For the first time, Andre realized music could be a refuge, a place where he did not have to defend himself. It was the first secret life he ever created, a quiet rebellion against a home where tenderness had no voice. His teenage years brought even sharper conflict. While other students practiced technical exercises, he chased resonance and emotional depth. His growing love for waltzes was met with contempt. His father famously snapped, "I didn't raise you to play waltzes," words that cut deeper than any failed rehearsal. By 1968, when Andre brought home Marjorie, the woman who truly understood him, his mother's fury erupted. She ordered her to leave, and Andre walked out that same night. He never returned. Decades of applause would never fully erase the silence of that final walk. This early fracture split Andre's existence in two: the man he showed the world and the wounded child who learned to hide behind elegance. It was the beginning of the double life no one would see until much later. By the mid-1970s, Andre Rieu was no longer the silent boy rehearsing in dim hallways. He was a young musician wrestling with the rigid traditions of European classical institutions. At the conservatory in Brussels, technique was warped and emotion was scorned. His professors demanded precision, not vitality. To them, waltzes were childish ornaments unworthy of serious performance. But Andre had already decided that his life would not be dictated by cold tradition. He wanted music that breathed, music that made people feel human again. Yet even this dream required him to build a second life, one hidden behind politeness, obedience, and the appearance of conformity. His rebellion took shape in 1978 when he founded the Maastricht Salon Orchestra, 12 dreamers who had more idealism than money. Their early performances took place in drafty community halls, aging wedding venues, and border towns where no critic bothered to visit. Yet these concerts, modest and unremarkable on the surface, were where Andre allowed his true self to appear. Here he wasn't the academically trained violinist. He wasn't the son weighed down by expectation. He was a man who simply wanted people to feel the warmth he had been denied as a child. But even rebellions require structure, and that came from Marjorie. She organized bookings, contracts, and financial survival with a precision that mirrored the discipline Andre despised from his upbringing. Yet this time it was softened by love. She became the invisible backbone behind his artistry, shielding him from logistical chaos so his fragile dream could live. For the first time, he was building a life that belonged to him, not to the shadow of his father. In 1987, he formalized his revolution by founding the Johann Strauss Orchestra. Again, 12 musicians. Again, critics sneered. Traditionalists mocked their colored costumes, their smiling stage presence, their audacity to believe classical music could bring joy instead of solemnity. But audiences felt something different. They didn't see defiance. They saw a man giving them permission to feel alive. Andre had created a global persona, but behind the scenes, his second life was emerging. A man pushing himself to exhaustion, fighting financial collapse, and carrying the emotional wounds he hid beneath elegance. No one knew it yet, but the cost of that dedication would soon shape the darkest chapters of his life. By the early 1990s, Andre Rieu had spent more than a decade climbing uphill, pushing his small orchestra forward with a determination that seemed limitless. But the breakthrough came in 1995 in a way no one, including Andre himself, could have predicted. When he performed Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2 at the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, a stadium of tens of thousands froze. Football fans, people who came for rivalry, not refinement, fell under the spell of a waltz. When Ajax scored, the timing was so uncanny that it felt choreographed by fate itself. Overnight, Andre became a global name. The success was enormous, but it came with a cost that quietly carved deeper into the double life he had been living. Audiences saw magic, the sold-out arenas, the laughing melodies, the joyful signature twirl of his bow. What they didn't see was the relentless workload he carried, far beyond what any musician should endure. He was not just the performer. He was the producer, the financier, the organizer, and the caretaker of every life in his orchestra. More than 100 staff members relied on him. He was responsible for every flight, every hotel, every rehearsal schedule, every stage transition. And with every tour that grew larger, the risks grew with it. Traditionalists attacked him, calling his concerts musical pornography, sneering at the gowns, the lights, the joy. They accused him of degrading classical music. But Andre kept smiling, insisting that music belonged to everyone. The truth, however, was harsher. He smiled because he had to. A global phenomenon could never show pain. By the 2000s, his empire had transformed into one of the most successful independent music operations in the world. More than 80 properties in Mric, a fleet of trucks, hundreds of employees, and a touring system as complex as a multinational corporation. His net worth soared above $600 million. But it was a fortress built on exhaustion. The man audiences believed was untouchable was in reality held together by willpower and fear of disappointing those who depended on him. Behind the curtain, the cracks were spreading. Andre began experiencing dizziness, trembling hands, and waves of fatigue, so severe he sometimes struggled to stand upright after a performance. But the show went on because he refused to let anyone down. His double life was reaching a breaking point, and no one, not even his closest fans, knew how close he already was to falling. By 2010, after decades of nonstop touring, sleepless flights, and carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders, Andre Rieu reached a breaking point he could no longer hide. What began as dizziness during rehearsals escalated into a full medical crisis. A viral infection had attacked his vestibular nerve, the core of his inner balance. For a violinist, it was nothing less than catastrophic. When he tried to stand, the room spun violently. When he tried to walk, the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Doctors ordered complete rest. Andre, a man who had built his identity on delivering joy, suddenly could not trust his own legs. Tours collapsed overnight. Months of planning, tens of thousands of tickets, and millions of euros in production were erased in a matter of hours. Fans around the world worried, unaware of how close their idol had come to losing everything. Behind closed doors, Andre lay bedridden, his eyesight swimming, his heart pounding with fear that his career had already ended. What the public saw as a temporary postponement was in truth a fight for his livelihood and identity. He later admitted that those months were some of the darkest of his life. Conventional therapies failed him, leaving Andre feeling trapped in a body that no longer obeyed him. Then came a letter from an Australian fan who had survived the same illness, explaining simple vestibular exercises that had saved his own balance. Desperate, Andre followed them meticulously. Slowly, painfully, the spinning world began to steady. After months of recovery, he stood again, first with hesitation, then with fragile confidence. But even as he returned to the stage, the truth remained. The illness had never fully left. His equilibrium was damaged, vulnerable, and easily pushed into relapse. Andre's management publicly denied rumors of recurring vertigo in 2012. But the internal memo was clear. One more severe episode could put him in grave danger, especially if it struck during a performance. Yet, he continued to tour, driven by loyalty to his musicians and love for his audiences. What no one knew was that this was the second life he now lived, one where every performance was a gamble, where Andre fought silently against a body that had become his greatest threat. His double life had begun its cruelest chapter. The maestro adored by millions on stage, and the man battling instability and fear in the shadows. Just as Andre began regaining his